Welcome back to a lifetime of Mafia tales. Today, Sal and myself do a part 2 episode on Greg Scarpa Sr. Greg was a Colombo Crime Family Capo, Hitman, and government informant. In part 1, we discussed his early life. Now we will cover his middle-aged life up until his death. When Greg got AIDS, his life slowly started to slip away, but he still managed to have enough energy to be a big part of the Colombo Crime Family War. He took out lots of people during this war. He even had attempts on his life but survived them. In the end, it wasn't getting shot in the eye that killed Greg. Instead, it was AIDS. The way he got AIDS is a story in itself, and we will cover that in today's episode. Greg had so many books about his life come out over the years. I'll be sure to put them in the video description. I highly recommend them. They are full of great information. Our part 1 episode is in the video description as well if you haven't seen it. There is so much information about him, so this is part 2. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this. Also, please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon channel for exclusive stories about Greg Scarpa. Alright, good morning and welcome back everybody. Today we're going to be covering Greg Scarpa part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, that's in the video description, so please check that out. But today we're going to be covering Greg's life, his middle age up until his death. So we got a lot of good information that we've got from books and documents online that we found about Scarpa. So Sal, I know I told you a little bit, but I think the way we could start off today's show is like by talking about his brother. And then like your information that you heard about his brother, because his brother was killed, and it was in the book, it said it was kind of very highly believed that Greg Scarpa did it, but there was no actual proof that did it. It was just, from what I read in the book, it said he was gunned down in a social club and 5 gunmen came in and they robbed the place, and then they shot Sal in the back of the head. And then it was said that a majority of them were African American, and that was the end of it. I mean, really, it was just like they said it was like some kind of racial thing, like vengeance that they were seeking on behalf of just the African American community.
I think when I spoke to the daughter, Linda, she mentioned that her uncle Sal was murdered, and it was one of the casualties of the life. But I don't think she would admit that her dad murdered his own brother.
And see, that's what it's the online and all kinds of different. I mean, the book made it clear, that they made it to like they wanted to say it was him, but they couldn't.
Right.
Even like other online videos and stuff, and a lot of people, they already say that he did it, which it could have been because all the other stuff that he was doing. And then Anthony Casso, the former underboss of the Lucchese family, came out and said that he knew that Greg killed Sal, his brother, and then also Joe Brewster, because he said he was afraid that they were going to out him as being an informant. So
Wow.
How he got that information, I don't know.
Well, information moved around, especially when a lot of these guys were working both sides of the aisle, working with the mob, working with law enforcement. I mean, it's kind of amazing what they got away with in those days.
Greg Scarpa Sr., he told the FBI that he knew who killed Frank DeChico, and then he also said he knew who killed Paul Castellano and Thomas Bellotti. And again, how he got that information, like you said, it kind of just travels. And for whatever reason, I mean, if it was in the book, it was because he gave the FBI information about that. So they really worked in, they documented everything, whether they used it or not, because they had all kinds of other information on the whole Gotti uprising and what happened with that. But he obviously wasn't going to be outed at the time. Like, they weren't going to just say, hey, Greg did it, because if they did, then they wouldn't have been able to keep him as an informant for 30 plus years or what it was. So I don't know, man. They just, again, the way information travels is strange. But
remember that Willie Boy Johnson was given information prior to the Castellano hit, which was December of '85. Bill Batista, we called him the Silver Fox, by the way. I knew Billy Batista. He hung around the Bergen forever, and he was given information. And I'm sure there was a couple of others given information. So the FBI didn't have to go too far to put it all together, put all the pieces together. Of course, that was in 85, early 85, late 85, after the Castellano hit. And all that information was funneling over to, they had a whole Gambino squad, FBI agents. Like at that point, they might have had 100 different FBI agents gathering information to eventually figure out how they were going to, go after Gotti. I mean, don't forget, that was like, say, a year before I testified. I testified in 86. So information that traveled around organized crime always led to the FBI putting this stuff together. And they had no clue. I mean, I actually heard this from FBI agents how they were going to go after Gotti until Gravano flipped, which was 91 or 92, something like that. So it was a lot of years went by.
And see, that's just the thing. They couldn't make anything stick to him,
Right.
which even with Greg giving information on him, they weren't going to be able to get him.
Right.
So I don't know. They eventually got him, but they really had to go about it a certain way, or else
Yeah.
they didn't want to out their informants as well. I
Right.
mean
Right.
that's a big deal too for them, because if they're out, then it's going to make it harder for them to get any kind of information.
Yeah. And in those years, to get a Title One, are you familiar with Title One?
Oh, what's that?
Title One is authorization to put a wiretap inside a location. It could be a building, a home, a car. It was very, very difficult. Legally, law enforcement had to get what they call PC, probable cause, to get a judge to agree to sign that order. And it was very complicated back in the early 80s about Title Ones. I mean, I was involved with the FBI with the Judge Brennan investigation. So Scarpa was pretty fortunate that they weren't allowed to get wiretaps or recordings in his house, but eventually they put all that information together. And as I said, when they have an active confidential informant, they just cover up all kinds of things. I remember the FBI told me it's like a license to steal if you're working with the FBI. And that's what Scarpa did. He played both ends.
Well, yeah, that was how he had such longevity in that life,
Yeah.
more than the
Yeah.
average person does,
Yeah.
or mobster, your average mobster, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I'll go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
He was such a vicious character that people just didn't believe he could have been working undercover. Who would have known that? And they kept everything very secret. Remember, some of his actions went back 20, 30 years, 40
Okay.
years. It's pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, and like getting to his because we're talking about his main, middle age and everything like that. Well, he ended up getting AIDS as well,
Yeah.
and,
Terrible.
and so when he got that, he was having like internal bleeding, I believe it was, or he lost a lot of blood because he
Oh,
was
yeah.
taking aspirin or something every day for his back pain that he was having, and so it eventually caught up with him, and so he needed blood, and he didn't trust the blood from the hospital. He wanted to get it from one of
Right.
his crew members,
Right.
his
Got it
own.
from a weightlifter or something.
Yep, that's what it was, and his crew. And I guess that weightlifter, he was injecting steroids in his body, and so then Greg, unaware of this and all that, he ended up taking his blood because it was a match for him,
Right.
and that's how he got AIDS. And when he did, he didn't believe it at first. I think they
Right.
got a couple different opinions, and then after that, he went and he eventually accepted it, and he didn't let everybody know though. He
Right.
he probably let that one guy know in his crew, but everyone else was under the assumption that he had cancer, and
Yeah.
even his children, until eventually it would come out that he did win a case because he
Oh,
sued the hospital for not testing the blood for AIDS, and
right.
I think he ended up winning over $300,000, I believe it was. So
Yeah.
that's when he called his daughter, and he's like, there's going to be some reporters that come up to you and they're gonna want to ask you some questions. And at that point, that's when he's like, "It's because I just won this case about AIDS, and so if they come to you, you know now." And then like she was just completely in shock.
Yeah. Yeah. She had to take care of him
Yeah,
till
that
the
whole,
end. Of course, that last, legal appearance that he made before Judge Weinstein, if you read the dialogue, it's all of public record. He wouldn't give him any more chances. He put him in jail, and that was it. It was very sad. But again, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. He died a miserable death because he was a miserable man.
well, before he went to prison, like, well, I'll get it and get into that too as well because there is more to cover in that part. But like, he still had enough energy to be a big part of this Colombo War, the third
Right.
Colombo War, where Vic Arena and Carmine Persico, they were the two factions that were having beef. Carmine Persico was already in prison, but he wanted his son, who was also in prison, Alley Boy, to come out and become the boss of the Colombo family. And apparently Vic Arena didn't like that. And then, so Greg, he knew that this was kind of what was going on, and this was going to cause him to get involved with it as well. And for him, he had to get the okay from his actual family. He like let them know, like, hey, do you think, or he's like, I want to be a part of this, I want to do it, kind of thing. And he's like, but I want your okay. And they're like, do what you got to do. And then
Yeah.
he went and he got in part of that. He wanted to be a big factor into that.
Yeah. Well, people might have thought it was a fascinating, glamorous life, but as I talked to Linda some years ago, she gave me a lot of information that she was sort of stuck in there. She was like a victim of his lifestyle. And then the mother, she would argue with her mother. And eventually, when that mother gave information to a couple of writers, they documented everything that she said. And some years later, they took that Del Vecchio to trial. What a mess that was. It was a terrible mess. Of course,
Yeah.
the government doesn't ever want to admit that one of their own FBI agents was corrupt.
Oh, no way. And see,
Yeah.
with the Colombo War as well, like the reason why Greg had such a want to be a part of that was because it said that he wanted to form a plan to get Vic Arena framed for murder. So he ended up getting life in prison for a murder that they say he didn't commit. And the reason Greg had like this want to put him away was because he was very much against drugs, and
Right.
Greg was trying to get involved with that deeply or more. And then Greg would also inform on Carmine Persico while this whole Colombo War was going on as well. So he was trying to get both of them out of it. So I don't know who he was going to think was going to take over the family. I mean, maybe him.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. What happened to Arena? Did he die in prison?
He's still there.
Oh, he's still in.
Yeah, he's still around. He's
Wow.
still. I looked it up, man. He's really older, and no, I don't know. Like his sons are the ones that really want to get him out of there. Like they've been like in a couple of the books and stuff that I read, like they're really vouching for his innocence in this, and like this case in particular, they say he didn't do this murder, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, but
Terrible.
while he was out on the street and this war was going on, Greg did send over a hit team to take him out. The guys pulled up next to him, Vic, while he was driving, and Vic was able to get away from like the car because he knew it was like Greg Scarpa's crew. So he took off and he knew that his life was in danger. So then after this, Vic Arena called a commission meeting with all five of the families. For sure, there was Little Al from the Lucchese family, and then it said John Gotti Jr. was there with the Gambino. So those guys were there, and it said that the commission said that they wanted a truce. Any side that goes to kill anyone would be killed by all of the families.
And he initiated that, and they agreed. Did they agree on that?
Well, I suppose Vic and them did, but
Yeah.
I don't think because the war continued on after that point. Yeah, it didn't stop. So like I don't know. Well, apparently there was an attempt on Greg's life as well. So um, Greg, when he was leaving his house, he had backed out of the driveway, and then I believe his daughter Linda was leaving at the same time, and then I think they went separate ways, but she ended up backing out, and then the car was coming towards Greg. It was trying to, but she like kind of cut it off, and then they got out of the car, and then they started shooting, not at her, but like I believe Greg, and they had like this big shootout, and then no one got killed on that at that event. I don't think. Maybe there was a couple guys that got shot or hit, but after that
Is that when he got shot in the eye?
no, he got shot in the eye. I think after he went to go with his son. It was about his son having an altercation with some guys, and it didn't work out too well. Like that was the event that ended up getting him prison time.
Yeah.
So I'll get into that after we talk a little bit more about the the Colombo War and some of the killings that were involved with that, like that Greg was took a part of. Like Greg killed a mobster named Tommy Scars. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Larry Mazza said that he was with Greg when this happened, and the mistakes they mistaked him. They were looking for Tommy's nephew, so that was one that where they were involved with. Let's see, there was another one where Greg Scarpa and Larry Mazza they killed a opposing mobster, Nicky Black. That day, the feds were telling Nicky they were following everywhere that he went, and then the feds got a call while they were watching him to go have a meeting with their boss, and they thought that that was strange. And Larry Mazza spotted the truck, and they went for it after they got the call or they got the okay that they seen. Maybe they were watching the cops as well, and they seen them backing away or they were leaving. So then they went up to the truck where he was at, and then they ended up. I believe Greg shot once, and then Larry Mazza got close to the window and shot him. And it was highly believed again that Lynn Del Vecchio was the one that helped Greg get the feds out of there. But
Wow.
then again, that's just something from the book. I don't know, and he didn't get in trouble for any murders, so you can't really say that he was guilty of it, I guess.
Wow. Yeah, sort of a wild, wild west back then.
And there was another incident where Greg they killed a man that was putting up his Christmas lights. He was another mobster, and then they killed another guy named Larry Lamps, and he was another guy that they had taken out. But there was multiple, man, and it's like he was getting away with all this for most of the whole time. I mean, he didn't get in
Yeah.
trouble for anything, but eventually he did get locked up. And when it came to him getting arrested, Lindell Vecchio did his best to get Greg out on bail and say that he wasn't going to run away. He gave his
Right.
word to Linda
Right.
Del Vecchio, and when Greg was out of prison, he was put on a ankle bracelet so the FBI knew his movements.
Yeah.
So, and that's where we'll get into the incident with his son Joey, and like
Wow.
how he got his eye shot out and all that. But I mean, what do you think about that information with the whole war?
Well, I was in California. I had already left the life and I read about it. I kind of believe that these families were self-destructing because I think some of the heads of the families knew that the FBI had these, active informants. And I don't believe they knew how to handle that because the technology was, rapidly increasing, and the availability of wiretapping and listening to all kinds of, actions and what was going on inside the mob. I think that greatly uh, valued the FBI work. And I believe some of those informants knew, whether it was Scarpa knew, whether he, whether Scarpa was getting information from Delvecchio and other agents, what was going on. So I think the families themselves, they knew they were, in trouble. And after Gotti, pulled off the Castellano hit, that's when they started to really focus in on all these different families. And of course, that was in in '86. God, he was acquitted on the case that I testified. But at the same time, that Colombo War continued all the way up till '93, I think it was, when they killed Scopo. He was sitting out in front of his house right there in Ozone Park, a couple of blocks from the Bergen, and somebody pulled up and killed him. So, and he was one of the last, I think, last murders in that Colombo War. What his involvement with Scarpa, I have no clue. I mean, I basically would read about this stuff from California. I had already left that life almost 9, 10 years earlier.
And that was really the end of that war. Like that
Yeah,
was, but Greg was picked up and he was arrested before the end of the war anyhow. So I'm not totally sure what went down with him, but with
yeah.
the incident, what led up to Greg going to prison was Greg Sr. You know, his son Joey, he had came to him one night and told him that some local drug dealers pointed a gun at him, and this made Greg pretty upset. And so, even with the ankle monitor that he had on, Greg went with his son Joey and they started a shootout with the guys that did this to him. And
Wow.
then, yeah, and Greg ended up killing one of them. Then Greg also got his eye shot out during this, and then
Yeah,
because of the shootout, you know, they ended up getting him
yeah.
there. And then Greg went home and was taken to the hospital by Larry Mazza. And then Greg was arrested for this since he killed someone and was responsible for their death. And
That's
yeah,
the story Linda told me about when he came home. He put a towel on his head and he refused to get medical attention, but he was bleeding so badly that he lost an incredible amount of blood. So I guess that's when he went and figured out he needed to get a transfusion. And then he picked the wrong guy. So if you look at their lives, I mean, how these guys lived and how they died, it was almost like, God had a plan for him to suffer and die. I mean, that's how I look at it. Some of these guys were lucky. Larry Mazza was lucky to get out alive. He's alive now, somewhere in Hollywood, doing whatever he's doing, telling stories like we all do. But he went through hardship too, Mazza.
yeah. And see what with the whole prison time though, like how it went down was that in 1993 he was indicted for the murders and a couple murders really was what it was. And then he
Yeah,
went to court and the judge said he could spend the rest of his days in a hospital bed instead of prison since he was very sick with AIDS, instead of letting him get out or have some kind of passionate release. But um, so in 1993 he pled guilty for the gun charges and he ended up getting 1 year on Riker Island bed, and then he ended up living longer than expected, and he wanted to go home and die. So they wanted to give the FBI. He even tried to give more information to the FBI to give him another deal, but it didn't work out too much,
no,
and it just the judge said no, and he got life in prison. But he ended up being able to go to a hospital for a while. And when he did go to this hospital, his daughter, little Linda, had to pay for all this. And she paid quite a bit of money to keep him in there. But then ultimately he ended up getting sent away. And yeah, you're right. Like he went in there, he died pretty
terrible.
slow. And yeah, just a terrible death. She watched him go underneath 100 pounds and just
Wow.
really, yeah, just he really lost so much weight and everything. Because from her book, I mean, there was a lot of information on that and how it
Yeah,
affected her and how she was taking care of him, and it was just terrible for her as
yeah.
well.
Terrible life, really. I guess she probably is down there in Florida trying to take care of her kids. And I think the last I heard, she was trying to take care of her mother, but a miserable life and still paying the price for the sins of the father.
Yeah, and like even in the book, it said that at Greg's funeral, even though he was a part of that life for 40 years, no wise guys showed up, and then even though I mean there wasn't a whole lot of people at all.
Yeah, terrible way to die.
Yeah, I really, really is. But I mean, the kind of life that he led, like you said, you don't make many friends like that. So
Yeah. And the pain and the stories didn't stop. because I don't know, what year did he die?
I think it would have been in the 90s. Let's see.
And
It was for sure in the 90s, I'll say that. I don't have it written down here, but
and then Del Vecchio was charged with all kinds of crimes, and he went to trial.
and like see and here's another testimony from Big Linda like about Lynn. It was that she testified on the stand that Lynn Del Vecchio said that one day Greg Sr. got a call from Lynn and he told him to go to a phone booth, and they did. And Greg and Linda were told that their son Joey's friend Patrick was giving the FBI information on
Right,
Joey, and Greg told his son, but he didn't want to believe it. So Greg said he had to kill him, and then Joey was devastated and wouldn't come out of his room. Then Linda Vecchio came over one night and told Greg that Joey is better to cry now instead of going to prison.
right,
And so they dropped her statements because they didn't match previous years of statements and stuff.
right,
But
right.
you said that you think that, I mean, she was telling the truth for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah, she didn't have any reason to lie, although, I mean, she did cover up a lot of the stuff that her dad did. But I think as the years went by, she wanted to separate herself from that life. And I believe she'll be scarred for the rest of her life. I know she's in Florida with her kids. I think she's got a couple of teenage twins and struggling, just struggling.
Oh, well,
Uh,
this one was Big Linda that testified that.
yeah. Well, both of them, they both lived a terrible life. And the mother gave information on two different occasions that it wasn't the same type of information. Why she was given, information to writers, I don't know, but she did meet with a couple of writers, and those guys were subpoenaed on the trial for Del Vecchio.
Well, yeah, and he ended up going in and out of court for a while, and he
Yeah,
beat his cases, and I believe he's still around today. He's, I think he's got his own private practice now,
right.
not like his, private investigator kind of thing. But other than that, I mean, he's been pretty quiet. He wrote the
Yeah,
one book about his life. I believe it's called "We're Going to Win This Thing,"
yeah,
and he gave his side of the story, and that was it. So I'm not sure. He's got to be. I mean, if he was cool with Greg back then, I mean, this guy's probably got to be in his 80s now.
yeah. Of course, yeah.
And with
What a
you, oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
what a terrible life to live.
Well, yeah, and like this again, the message of this show is like it's just a terrible life that crime doesn't pay, and you reap what
Right.
you sow, man. You live like that. You take
Yeah.
other people's lives and stuff. It's not going to end well for you. And
No.
usually it ends in death or prison, or
Right.
of course we always hear that, or like Sal always says, you reap what you sow. I mean, you kill, you take life, you die a miserable death after. So
I'm convinced of that. Really, all these people that I met or heard about over the years, they all died pretty miserable.
right, and it's just a terrible way to go down, man. And then, like
Yeah.
the whole family got sucked into it as well. Like with his son got deeply involved with it, Greg Jr., and then Linda, she had to see and hear all the stuff that he was involved with because he was very vocal about it. According to her book, like he talked about hits and stuff that he did and crimes and beating up people. And so, and of course, the event where she almost was involved in that shootout, like she's just pulling out of her car with
Yeah.
her like newborn kid, just trying to go to the store, and
Yeah.
then the shootout occurs, and then the kids witnessing all these bullets going by and hearing loud noises. And I mean that had to been a traumatic event. You don't forget that stuff, man.
Right.
Like that's
Right.
terrible. Like that they all had to
Yeah.
have some kind of way of being around that or being involved into that. So
Yeah.
it's just best to stay away from that life, man. Any criminal life. um, but yeah, I mean, do you got any other information or anything you want to put out there about Scarpa before we finish this part two on him?
I'm kind of thinking that maybe in a strange way, all that's been written about that guy would dissuade other young guys from thinking that the life in the mob is glamorous and glorious and exciting. And so listening to the way he lived his life and how he killed people and died, maybe in a strange way, it's going to show up that people will say, well, I don't want to live that life. And maybe, there's a blessing in disguise. Look, you live like that, you kill, and you die a miserable death. So why try to follow other people in that life? But people look at movies, they think it's glamorous.
See, this is the real deal, though. You read a book like like the one we're talking about, for instance, like the whole one. There's a couple made about Greg, but like just them being made just shows that side of the crime. Yeah, you
Yeah,
get involved with all that kind of stuff. You live it for a while, man, and then in the end, you pay the price.
yeah,
And this just gives a reality check of, okay, well, look what the family went through. Look what they all had to go through and
right,
suffer, and
right,
for years and years. Yeah, he may have been out on the street, but while he was on the street, was it really a fun time?
right.
I mean, no.
Well, the people that listen to our podcast, a lot of times they'll sort of gauge, oh, this guy, he wasn't a made guy, so he was nobody. He was just insignificant. When in fact, they should realize that once you agree to become a made member, you're at the mercy of the people above you. If they tell you to show up, you better show up. So I always felt like, wow, it was an easy way to get killed by signing up to be underneath, like Cataldo. And every time he called, I had to show up. So, early on, like, in the late 70s, I was ready to leave that life. It was just that after I put all that time in, I wanted to leave with some money, you know, and
Yeah,
that's what gets you. The money always gets you.
it's never enough.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
because yeah, by the time you think it's enough, man, it's probably too late. The feds are already building a case on you and everything.
Right.
You never know, like especially now, man. They probably watch everything.
Yeah.
So, no, I mean this was good. I think us covering this part one and part two. I hope people get a, it's used for entertainment purposes, but even as well, like hopefully they get a message out of this episode. Maybe you got a kid or a grandkid. I know a lot of people that watch our show are not my age. Not they're a little bit over maybe the middle age or 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Hell, man, anything
Yeah.
up usually. But maybe they got a kid, a grandkid, or just something that they can really try to instill in them from these messages that we talk about, like these
Yeah.
stories and stuff. Like, I mean, you could really learn a lot from these stories, and there's a lot to be learned from them, man. So I'll just end it
Every
there.
yeah. Every one of those mob movies, if you think about it, they end negatively. It could be Goodfellas, Donnie Brasco, all these mob movies that end in a terrible way, and it's a terrible message, and you don't see anybody, that's happy and peppy and bursting with love. It's not happening.
No, never.
So if you let your young people, your young family members look at it, then they realize, oh, this is terrible, bad way, to go. Whether it's Scarface, any of these movies ends in violence and death.
Yeah, and throughout the rise as a criminal as well, it's just constant paranoia and
Right.
being worried and always stressed out and stuff. It's just there's a lot, man, not to look to want to
Yeah.
be into that. So
Yeah.
now we'll go over to Patreon, everyone. So if you're not subscribed to our Patreon channel and you'd like to get more exclusive stories from Sal and myself, all you got to do is just go to the video description and sign up for our Patreon. But we're going to go over there now and finish up this episode. We're going to go over there and talk about Greg Scarpa Jr., a little bit about him and the information that he gave to just about his life and his book. So yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see everyone over there, and thank you again so much for watching. Greg Scarpa was seriously something else. It is insane how much crime he got away with over all those years. He was given a past that no one should ever get. It allowed him to get away with so much crime. Either way, it caught up with him in the end. He died a horrible death in prison. This is a prime example of why you should stay away from crime. It's no good. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of video. Also, please don't forget to check out part 1. It's in the video description. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and our Patreon channel if you want to get more exclusive videos. Please be sure to check out the playlist at the end of the video. It's called A Lifetime of Mafia Tales, and on that playlist you can see all of our other podcasts that me and Sal have done in the past. And if you enjoyed this podcast that I do with Sal, I think you'll enjoy my other podcast called the Invest in Yourself podcast. On that podcast, I cover great redemption stories. I interview ex-gangsters, ex-mobsters, ex-drug dealers, former drug addicts, all kinds of different people. So please check that out. All you got to do is just click the YouTube icon and go to our page, and then go to the playlist tab and click the Invest in Yourself podcast, and all my podcasts will pop up on there. Thank you again so much for watching, and of course, we'll see you on the next one. If you would like to support our podcast, we got a few items that you can purchase. All of these items can be found in the video description below. The first one is Sal's book, The Sinatra Club. You can get this personally autographed by Sal. The next one and our hottest seller is the 1972 Sinatra Club playing cards. Back in Sal's Mafia days, he opened up his own social club named the Sinatra Club. Many mobsters would come to this club, even when there were all-out wars going on between different families. They would come to the Sinatra Club and play cards. Some of the mobsters that played with these cards were John Gotti, Dominic Cataldo, Tommy DeSimone, Foxy, Jimmy Burke, Willie Boy Johnson, Tony Roach, Henry Hill, Joe DeFede, Danny Fatico, Gene Gotti, Peter Gotti, Joey Scopo, and many more. We're selling each one of these cards for $10 a piece. These cards are limited, we only got 1,000 of them. The next item is an autographed picture of Sal from his Mafia days. Another item is the Dinner with the Mobster card. You can get this autographed as well. This was an event that Sal had hosted in the past. We also got the Ubots production ticket from an event that Sal had hosted. This is also autographed. The last item we got to offer is Sal's book, The Sins of the Father. Again, you can find all these items in the video description below.